When I was given my marching orders this morning, I was instructed to introduce myself in my own language, and so it's always appropriate. It tells you who you are, where you come from, and what clan house you are from. Shaganastayu chatuasal Klinedi ayachat Kagwan tan yadi Dachloedi Dutch gunk. My Tlingit name is Shaganasta. I am a raven, dog salmon clan. I am a child of a wolf and a grandchild of a killer whale. My English name is Bob Sam. I was born and raised here in Sitka. My family originally comes from Juneau. My mother, Bessie Kitka, was born in Juneau out in Auk Bay, so I am of the Auk tribe. But I was raised here in Sitka and spent most of my life here, and I was very fortunate to have lived in the village of Sitka and had spent some time with some elderly people that had some knowledge of this session called sacred sites and historic sites. I originally agreed to do this session with a man named John Autry. He works for the Forest Service, and he was planning on him and I were planning on sitting on a panel together, because the Forest Service is drafting policy on sacred sites, so we thought this would be a very good time to do a session on sacred sites and historic sites, and we've been communicating the last few months, going back and forth, and it got very tense. The issue of sacred sites and historic sites was a very, very sensitive issue, and at times it got very, very tense with both John and myself, and so as time went on, in finding the right words to do this session, it really created some difficult and tense feelings. So here I am standing. I agreed to do this session because it's something that I deeply, deeply believe in what I'm doing. From the time I was very small, even back into the early 50s, I can remember what it was like going out in the forest and going out to very special places. Back when we still had our ancient forests and our ancient places and our sacred sites. And some of my uncles and my father and my stepfather would point out certain places that were very, very special to the people of Sitka, and I had no idea that time would go on and my elders would be passing away. I had no idea all that information would be taken with them. Sacred sites is as I stated earlier, is a very, very sensitive issue, and I wondered why the Forest Service wanted to finally, after 50 years of logging out on the Tongass National Forest with the pulp companies and the 50-year contract, why put together a policy now? Why 50 years later? Why? Why did they suddenly decide to do it so late? They could have done it 50 years ago, when these things, one of our most sacred places, were still out there, still intact. Many of these places have disappeared. Every single day we are losing sacred places. Every day of our lives we are losing them. They were being dismantled and studied and taken to warehouses, and many of the objects that were once on the land were taken to museums and studied by highly professional people. Why now? After 50 years, after most all of these places are gone. In my heart, in my soul, I can still remember what it felt like to go out and to offer, to make an offering to these places. I could still remember the ancient trees. I could still remember the places that my uncles used to take me to. I can still remember them. And when I die, I will go to those places. So even though they are gone now, I can still feel them. So I will go, because it's burned into my memory what these places used to look like. All of the Tongass National Forest, what is known as the Tongass National Forest, is sacred to our people. We are a unique people in this country, the Tlingit and Haida and Tsimshian people. We are a unique people when it comes to, we are a people that live within the confines of a national forest. We live, and we are a living culture, and we are still alive, and we are thriving in the Tongass, a living culture. A lot of what I'm going to say today you may not agree with. I have seen archaeologists. I have seen highly professional people go out to these places, and I have been told that the Tongass belongs to the public. It belongs to the rest of the United States. I have been told that. But in my heart, I feel that the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian are being suppressed. We are not being consulted over access to our sites. We are not being included. The people that, please forgive me, the Forest Service, BLM, the federal agencies, the state agencies, they think they are the ones that have the ultimate say-so over our sacred sites. The people that have the bloodlines, the clans, the clan leaders, the people that utilized the forest, the people that went out there and had and paid respect to their ancestors, they are the ones that have the ultimate say-so over these what is quoted as sacred sites. Please talk to them, consult with them, talk with the clan leaders, talk with the people, include them in the decision-making process of what you have in your mind on what you are going to do with these sites. Even though I am not currently working for the tribe, oftentimes I get phone calls. When a site is disturbed here in this area, oftentimes I'm the one that gets called. There's this one site very near this, right close to downtown Sitka, where a skull was taken and removed from a shaman's burial site, and it was taken by these kids. Nobody wanted to put this skull back in its original place. No one wanted to touch it. It was very, very painful for me. When I received the phone call, I said, just take the skull and put it back in the same place it came from and cement it in so that in the future it isn't disturbed. This place was disturbed twice by the time I was asked to take care of it. I had to physically prepare myself because this individual, this Icht, was considered a very, very powerful individual and important to the people of this community. I had to physically touch this skull and place it back in its original location. I don't normally talk openly about my work. All my work I keep private. I keep very, very private. 20 years ago, to be very honest and to be very blunt with you, I used to work with elderly men, Tlingit men. And we used to sit and talk about these things. And we used to ask the ladies to leave and to respect what we're doing. It was important that the men take responsibility to talk about this kind of issue of handling human remains, sacred places. It was very, very important. And I'm so grateful that I had opportunity to sit in a room with these elderly men. And they had a very, very kind way of explaining why it was important that men handle this kind of issue. Many of these elders passed away in time, and they were so knowledgeable of these places. And we live in a different time now. And I am, to be honest, I struggle. I truly struggle with the time that we're living in right now, because many of our Tlingit women are more educated than guys like me. They have their degrees. They go on and become administrators, supervisors, and they actually become my boss. And oftentimes I'm placed in a position where I have to talk to my boss about something that's very sacred to my people. Sometimes I even have to talk to a Forest Service individual who's a female. And it's very, very difficult situation for me. because I was trained by some elderly men, and I wish in my heart that I can explain why it's so difficult for me to talk to them. It affects my whole soul in a way that it created tension between my tribe, people that I work with, associate with the work that I do. It's really sensitive, and I apologize for my upbringing and for the time that we're living in. And I was going to ask today, it was so tense, and it was so tense between myself and other agency people about this session that I really felt bad about the hard feelings. So when it really came down to it, I decided maybe it's time for the ladies to hear what I have to say. The role of men in our society is important. We need to back up our men. We need to support what was traditionally the role of a man. And we need to hold them up and support them, because I have never met anyone that can go out and actually take these very sacred places and to actually physically go there and to do what is necessary. It's very important that we find the men in our society so that we can support them and hold them up and give them the tools that they need. Because right now, many of our men are walking the streets homeless. Their responsibility was taken away from them. They suffer from drugs and alcohol, and things are done that was traditionally their responsibility. So I really feel a sense of loss. Many of my friends that are still out there on the streets. So I want to do this in a good way, and I hope that I don't offend anyone. I know that there is a place in today's world where we can include everyone, our elders, our women. I really suffered in my own soul about how I was going to do this presentation, and I had to do it in such a way that I don't offend anyone. So sacred sites, there are people out there that have it within their heart and soul to actually go out and it's those of us that go to these places and we don't take our responsibility lightly. We really have to prepare ourselves and live a good life. When we go out to these sites, we offer tobacco, we pray, and one of the things that I do is I burn incense, and I ask when I go to a site, sometimes I go inside a cave, I go inside a very special place, and I I burn incense in this cave, and I ask the spirits to don't follow me back home. I ask them to please follow the smoke and not follow me, because these spirits are so powerful. There are places out there that are so powerful that if we don't prepare ourselves, it can make us very sick. It can hurt us. There are places out there that so many of our people have died and given their lives, and their souls are still there. And so we have to be very, very careful. And there are places out there where they are intact. I hear many, many stories from people all across southeastern Alaska about grave sites, cemeteries that have been taken and robbed, and headstones that have been desecrated, places that have been destroyed, and what happens to the descendants and the people, that that it really hurts us very, very deeply. What happens to all of our sacred places. So I'm very concerned. There are many places that are being destroyed even as I speak. It brings tears to my eyes to see these places leave us. And it brings even more tears to my eyes when I see highly professional people not talk to the people whose lives they touch when they take these places apart. We are the ones that have the ultimate say-so. The people, the ones that used to go out and utilize these places, the clan leaders, the clans, the areas that they once used, they are the ones that own that land. They are the ones that you should be talking to and working with and consulting with. There are some very, very special places out there. I really hoped that my friend John Autry could be here today so that I can apologize to him. So if there's somebody from the Forest Service, please, I'm not trying to offend you. This is the homeland of the Tlingit people of Sitka. This is their homeland. This is the land that they have walked on for thousands and thousands of years. And please don't do things without us. Include us in your decision-making process. Someday, I hope that I have a nephew that can go on and get the same education that you have, so that someday they will take your place. And they can walk into the forest as a Forest Service employee and they could be seen as the expert, and they could be seen as the person who has the ultimate say-so of what happens on our land. I feel very strong about that. I'm trying to do this in a good way. I'm trying to share what I know in a good way, so that we can, as a descendant of the people who walked on this land, if we treat these places in a good way, the descendants, they will get stronger. They will get healthier. A sign of a healthy community is a sign of clean cemeteries and going out and showing respect to our sacred places. We will live long into the future if you include us. Oftentimes, when I see what happens to our land, it's like giving somebody a big pile of gold. When you give somebody a big pile of gold, they don't want to let go of it. They think it belongs to them. But these sacred places, this big pile of gold, it belongs to the Creator. It belongs to the ancient people. And it belongs to the descendants of the people whose homeland this is. I go out, when I go to these places, when I crawl into these caves, when I leave, I make sure the human scent is gone. I make sure that my footprints are gone. I wipe away, and I let nature take care of these places. Nature takes better care of these places than I can. And I make sure that no one else can go. I'm very careful about who I show some of the places that exist in this area. They're even right downtown in Sitka, there are many places. There are canoe haulouts, ancient village sites, ancient clam gardens, legend sites, ancient places, cemeteries that all still are fort sites. They are still out there, and there are some places where it is still intact. So it's not too late to do the right thing. It's not too late to do what we need to do. We are in an opportunity right now to work with the indigenous people of Alaska and to do it correctly. I hope that we can now open a dialogue with the people who are currently taking care of these places. You don't own them. You are only caretakers. And all of us are caretakers of these places. At this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Charles to come up and talk about a concern that he had regarding a burial site from his area.
Beneshish. I am Sline D. Hit of the Double-Headed Raven Dog Salmon House, and I'm the grandchild of the Kagwantan of the Wolf House. My Tlingit name is Ta'ask, which means never get tired and never give up, and looking for something to do when I am all done. I have prayed to the Khan Cow that I may say the right words, that you may visualize what I have gone through. I am going to speak to you about the invasion and the theft of a shaman's grave and the deathly consequences that followed immediately. When I was 21 years old, I need to identify these here people thoroughly, as I want to get this here trunk back. When I was in this here logging camp, the owners of the logging camp treated me with the greatest and highest respect. They treated me as if I was their own son. They bought me most expensive gifts, the most expensive hickory shirts. I did not even have to eat in the chow hall of the logging camp. I ate with the owners all the time, as they loved me dearly. Each and every day, I was in their house immediately when I was all done with work. One day I walked in there and I seen the most beautiful bentwood trunk in which I have never seen anything. To this day, I have never seen a trunk as beautiful as that. And I said, wow. I said, where did you get such a beautiful thing? And they told me it's that Curly Gaddis took this here trunk from the shaman's grave. I told him, I said, wow. I said, wow. Immediately I went to Craig from the town, from the logging camp of Orr Island. Immediately I went to Craig and reported this here story to elders, Ralph James and Elwood Thomas. They gave me a message to take back to them. I told the owners the message. I said, the person, Curly Gaddis, who took this here trunk, I said, if he does not return this trunk within 3 days, he is going to die. And that he must take the trunk and put it back exactly where he got it, in the same position and facing the same direction as when he took it. And to back up until his feet hits the water, and to turn around and leave, and don't look back and nothing will happen to him. Should it be that he don't return it, he will die. And then the people that who have the trunk, if they do not return this trunk, immediately their most favorite loved one will die. Then Curly Gaddis never made it back to camp on Sunday for our Sunday dinner. The Sunday dinners were very special, and he never did miss that. We went out and we searched and searched and searched for him. The only thing we found was his gas tank of his outboard engine, turning around in circles very slowly in a whirlpool, right close to the shaman's grave. There was no sign of Curly Gaddis again. There was no sign of his skiff. We never did find him. I went back and I told Blackie Neely, I said, see what happened. I said, if you don't return it, turn the trunk, your most favorite loved one will die, and you will die as poor people. And he laughed and he laughed and he laughed, and he was a great, big, solid, strong man. That was when I found out that they had a daughter that was going to school in Anchorage, and she was 16 years old, and she died. Blackie Neely told me, he says, son, he says, I will never die as a poor man. He said, even if I was to retire from logging today, I would live to be an old man, and I would still be wealthy. I said, I don't know, Blackie. All they told me is that you would die as a poor man. I myself was in shock that their daughter died at the age of 16. And Blackie and Laura was wealthy people. The logging camp was proclaimed as the safest logging camp in Alaska on Ore Island. I could prove my story through the Alaska Loggers Association with all the death that went on there at that time. I could prove it. Tremendously big yarding machines that was worth over $100,000. One of them froze up. The whole machine froze up on top of the mountain. So we had to have another yarding machine built, a brand new one, over $100,000. The insurance companies did not pay for these losses that come out of Blackie Neely's own personal income. So we had this other yarding machine built with many cables and pulleys. We pulled this here yarding machine up to the top of the mountain. A brand new one. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful yarding machine. Then when we got it all the way up to the top of the mountain, the lines broke. That yarding machine tumbled and tumbled and tumbled all the way down the mountain, all the way down the mountain, right to the beach. It was terrible. One froze up, and then the other one just totally garbage. Shortly after that, our yarding machine, the A-frame that pulled the logs down from the mountain, from another yarding machine up on top of the mountain down to the water. The carriage that brought the logs down on a tight line, the carriage by itself was heavier than a school bus. Then that yarding machine froze up. That yarding machine just totally froze up. So we had to have another one built. The skyline that brought the logs down from the top of the mountain from another yarding machine, the cable was tremendously big. And then that their cable broke on top of the mountain. It was a horrible scene. The tide was so strong, there was great big whirlpools right alongside the A-frame all over the place. Even logs would disappear in the whirlpools, going straight down. When this here cable broke and it was coming down, I looked up to the top of the mountain and I was watching this here cable coming down. And it was lashing in all directions. Trees, great big trees, were going straight up in the air. Perfect cut, just like it was cut with a chainsaw. I looked at the water and I said to myself, if I jump into that water, no one is ever going to find me. No one. I will never be seen again. There was no place to go. I said, if I stay on this here float, I said, when that cable comes aboard here, there's no chance for me. I'm never going to make it. So I stayed on the float. I said, at least they'll be able to find me. I was totally impressed when it is all over. The coils of the cable coming down, bouncing on the float. In all levels, the cables were coming down, the coils are coming at me. And it was going completely over the float and into the water. To this day, I do not understand why I did not get hit. The coils were going past me at the speed of lightning. It was coming straight on the ground above my head. It was all over me. I was totally impressed that I was not hit. The story that I could tell you, to give you a very good story, it would take me at least 2 hours to tell it to you. There's so much to it. And I have to stop right now. And I really would like to have somebody help me in writing this here story and help me to get this here trunk back. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Kalishchish. Kalishchish.
I've been working with sacred sites and cemeteries most all of my adult life. I am one of the original members of Sea Alaska's Historic Sites Committee. I've been working with them since back in the 80s. Sea Alaska's Historic Sites have a very thick book on the historic sites for all over southeastern Alaska, and I can recall back in the early 90s that there was an effort to turn all these sites back over to the clans and the families that they belong to, and one of the individuals that was very active on Sea Alaska's Historic Sites Committee was a man named Al Perkins. Every time he got up and he would stress how important it was to turn these sites back over to the clans and the families that they belonged to. And back in 1996, at the last Sea Alaska Elders meeting, it was dropped. It was never addressed again. We were so close to getting them back to the families in the clans. It was stopped. We need to find a way to get them back to the clans that they belong to. We need to organize our elders once again and create a strong voice that we want our sites back. We want to have access to our sites. We want management of our sites. It's important. It's what keeps us alive as a people. And I hope that as we go on into the future, I may not see it in my lifetime, but someday it will happen. Someday our people are going to get strong enough to have access and management and control of our sites. And I'd like to utilize the rest of this time if there's any questions or concerns from Tlingit people, Haida, Tsimshian, or agency people who I know are very concerned about what I'm saying right now. But we are a living culture that lives within the confines of the Tongass National Forest, whose homeland we have walked on for thousands of years. Please acknowledge that and work with us. Right now, I go out on the Tongass forest and I go to these caves and these ancient places and I manipulate them. You can arrest me right now. And the comment that I get is from the Forest Service, it says, Bob, we'll just look the other way. we cannot continue that kind of relationship. And I will continue to go out there, and I will continue to manipulate these places until you arrest me. And until you create a policy so that we can do this as a people, and we can do it with dignity and respect. I was taught by some very good people on how to take care of human remains and how to take care of an ancient site. I was taught by some very good people. So I'd like to open it up if anyone has concerns. I apologize if I offended anyone, but I'd like to hear from you.
I was wondering, and I don't mean to sound offensive, but is there a reason why there are only, the graveyards are like 2 or 3 people, and then there's only that few there, and then you go a ways and there's only like maybe 3 or 4? Why didn't they bury them in a central location?
For over all of my adult life I've been restoring cemeteries here in Sitka. It's something that I've always done, and every cemetery is actually quite different. Some many families are own family plots, some clans own family plots, and every area there's over 25 major cemeteries here in Sitka, and in the village there was clan-owned cemeteries that were owned by different clans. Over the years, these places have fallen into neglect. Trees have grown, brush have grown, and a lot of the graves have just disappeared. There's actually much more there than you can see. There's a lot of places like the cemetery right up here, the Russian Orthodox cemetery. There's 1,600 people buried in that cemetery, but only 600 headstones. So there's actually much more than what you can really see. Today the whole place is all completely restored. I've washed every headstone in that cemetery and restored the place into a point where it's very respectful place. So there's actually much more than what we really see.
I have a concern. Down in Ketchikan, or Saxman, we have been working with the sacred sites. I have been working with John Autry, who is a dear friend of mine. What we have a concern and we have issues with is we get gigantic tour ships in Ketchikan, sometimes 5 to 6, 7 ships in our harbor, which offload 3,500 people in one day. That's like 17 to 20,000 people into Ketchikan in one day. We have charter fishing boats. We have tourists going everywhere under the sun. We have people, we have tour boats driving right up to petroglyphs inside inside the Eunuch and down by Misty. And these boats run right up, and some of the petroglyphs are right along the rocks, so what happens is the water comes up and it breaks right on the rocks, and eventually those will be gone. But we can't stop them right now. There is so many people getting off into Ketchikan. We can't control all the charter fishing boats. We can't control anybody who just kind of wants to rent a boat and just go out and see these places. I have been a part of making or helping I don't know necessarily helping, but I have talked about the Forest Service policy for sacred sites. And what I get concerned about is I know that in our area, I'm only speaking for our area, is that the Forest Service has kayaks that go out, and sometimes they monitor these sites. And in our area, if some of these sites are being, like, some of these, I'm not going to mention the names because I don't want people to go and, go on those sites. But if they're not being monitored, who is going to monitor them? I wish we had it enough together, like Bob does, to actually take care of our own sites. But we have not had that opportunity yet. We haven't gathered enough of our men to try to take care of those sites on our own. And we have so many, we had a couple years ago, there was one big tour group that was taking a whole group of people down to Cape Fox Village, trucking around in the woods and just, going through the village site. And I don't know how we're going to work on that management plan or that sacred sites plan. But there are sites that I know that the Forest Service, in that big Forest Service book, there are some things that are called sacred sites. And that's a definition that the Forest Service and our Native people are going to have to look at. And I guess I'm saying is that I know there's sacred sites everywhere, and I know that everything we consider is sacred. But the fact of the matter is that this policy is at a higher level than just us. We could get the federal, I wish in this beautiful world that we had tribes, that our local tribal government can work on that tribal government relationship with the Forest Service to try to get that relationship to define sacred, or we can define sacred. But in that Forest Service plan, what is it, T-lump or something like that, there's a big long definition that we have to start looking at, because it's not going to get resolved. We have to work on it on a different level. We have to get to work with the Forest Service in that relationship so we can start identifying some of those places. Like us down in our area, we have 17,000 people in Ketchikan in one day. I can't control that. If some of those sites that are owned by the Forest Service, some of them are 14H1 sites that are owned by Sea Alaska, the BLM, those sites, we can't stop them from going into those areas. Sea Alaska has been nice enough to call us when there has been permits to go on to Cape Fox Village or to go on to other sites. They have been very nice. There's a permitting process I know that the Forest Service uses. Just get people familiar with that process. I think it's happening. I don't know how we can stop it or what, but we need to start finding a solution on how we can work with these entities to try to get them at a talking level with us. And kind of that was my concern. Thank you.
Is there somebody from the Forest Service who would like to respond to?
My name is Lillian Petershore. My Tlingit name is Ikundu. I work in the regional office, and I work as a tribal government relations specialist. And there's a lot that I have to learn about sacred sites and with regard to sacred sites policies with the Forest Service. But I did want to share some initiatives that we are taking with regard to consultation. And I thank Bob for saying that this is a sensitive topic, and it's one in which we have to dialogue with one another. We do have to do consultation. We do have to communicate. There was reference made to the TLUMP amendment, the forest plan, and that the Tongass has a draft sacred sites policy. You have until the end of April to comment on that. Simultaneously, there is something that is happening with regard to sacred sites in terms of policy, and it's happening at a national level. And it started from a movement several years ago, and our own Carol Jorgensen, many of you know Carol. She was a Forest Service employee, and she joined a team of individuals that created this draft implementation report on how the Forest Service was going to interact with tribes. And that report was given to the chief of the Forest Service, and he embraced it. He felt that there was a lot that could be done between our agency and the tribes to improve our relationships. And one of the recommendations in that team report was that we work towards developing a policy on sacred sites. And so about, I want to say, 2 summers ago, maybe, there was a team of Forest Service people who came up to Alaska, and John Autry escorted them through many communities in Southeast Alaska, and they had listening sessions. And then this team continued to meet, and they took the input that they got from these listening sessions and from other listening sessions that they had around the country, and they started working on a draft document. You can imagine, with the diversity that we have as Native people across the country, how challenging that task was. It wasn't surprising that they stymied, and that it was a slow document that was slow in development. There had been hopes that it would get out, a draft copy would get out to the tribes in a much more timely fashion, but we all know that bureaucracies tend to run slow. Well, this implementation, this draft sacred sites policy was recently completed in terms of being a written document. It's not a final document, it's still a draft. But it finally made its way back to the Washington office, and there was an accompanying report that needed to be produced. That was written, and now it has gone out to tribal relations program managers. It's not at the point yet where it can be released to the tribes, but it will be, I imagine, within the year, we've been told. Something that we're working hard to accomplish. There is a group that developed. We also simultaneously had to work on electing tribal leaders to serve on a National Tribal Leaders Committee. And I don't know if you've heard of that effort, but Woody Widmark was elected tribal leader to serve by the 19 tribes in Southeast, and Millie Stevens was elected as the alternate. We took the model that we use to collaborate with the tribes, to use the same model so that we can develop a plan for sharing this draft sacred site policy when it comes out. We kept the list of everyone who attended those listening sessions, and you will get a copy of that draft policy. And then in addition to that, Woody and Millie and a couple of people from the Chugach who were elected to be on this national committee, they're going to help us work towards doing that meaningful consultation. So it's not just something you get in the mail, that it's interactive, that we're dialoguing with one another. And so that meaningful input is being taken back to Washington, D.C. So, thank you for your time. Thank you, Bob. And we happen to have Forest Service, other Forest Service staff who are here participating in this. And I wanted to introduce one person, but before I do, I also wanted to share something else. I think, hearing Bob speak, I think it's really important that we work to find our common goals. And I heard some goals that Bob articulated that we in the Forest Service are endeavoring to embrace. Bob spoke about one day he wants to see a nephew work as an archaeologist in the forest. We're working this summer in the regional office, we're working to set up some internships, and we've applied with the First Alaskans Institute in Anchorage, who hosts 30 interns a summer. And we're creating a match between a Tlingit student who is a junior at Fort Lewis College studying anthropology and an archaeologist with the Forest Service who was in this room earlier, Myra Gillingham, wants to be the host archaeologist that this student will be working with this summer. And we're hoping that our application and the student's application gets accepted by First Alaskans. In addition, we've applied for 5 other interns because we want to embrace the concept of employing Alaska Native youth so that they can recognize the opportunities that are available to them for their future. And it's something we need to collaborate on together to be more effective. And with that thought of collaboration and partnership and working with the tribes, I hope you'll indulge me, Bob. May I introduce Terry Fifield? Because I think there's a model of collaboration that he used that has been held up around the country. And maybe he could take just a few brief moments to share this, but we passionately feel that dialogue and consultation are important. Maybe in the past we didn't feel that way, but I'm really heartened by the leadership that I work with, and we just have to focus on the future and collaboration and partnerships. Thank you, Terry.
Mind if I go to the mic, I think, just in the interest of sound quality. Well, thanks, Bob, and thanks to Lillian for introducing me. And I'm Terry Fifield. I'm Forest Service archaeologist down on Prince of Wales Island, where I've been for about 12 or 14 years or so, depending on where you count from. But first, I wanted to say about our friend John. John would have really liked to have been here. There are few things in his life that he values more than this topic, and he would have liked to have been here. And I think he deferred, thinking that the leadership of this discussion should be in the hands of Native people, and he was a little worried about the Forest Service being in a in a leadership position in the discussion. And so I think that's the main reason that he's not here today. And it is in sort of in support of the values that you were putting forward, and that elders and clan leaders and Native people should be leading this discussion and defining what sacredness is. And it's the Forest Service's role to try and figure out how to manage those values on the land for the resources that we are the stewards or the caretakers of. And of course, I think if you look through the policy in the new Tongass Land Management Plan revision, you'll see in there over and over again consultation, consultation, consultation. It's a reflection of changes in the national laws that have taken place over the last 15 years. The National Historic Preservation Act in 1992 was amended to include consultation at a very high level. The National Environmental Policy Act was amended more recently to include consultation. There have been sacred sites legislation passed. There have been executive orders requiring us to consult with tribes on policy making. And so this is, the new Tongass Land Management Plan reflects that. The whole sacred sites section is new, and it's added in responding just to the concerns you're talking about. And I wouldn't for a minute deny any of the bad stories, the negative things that have happened in the past, and the question of why did it take 50 years is a good one. But I think you see a lot of policy changing very different than what it was 50 years ago, not only in Native American graves policy, but in all kinds of environmental policy and everything else. And I think our times are different than what they were 50 years ago. The pressures are different, and I would just say now is the time, and I think we better move forward from here. Some of the little, to illustrate a little bit about the word that I like to think about in terms of how we manage these places that some call sacred and some call cultural places, and some of us who are archaeologists callously call them archaeological sites. But I think the inclusiveness and openness in designing projects has given the best goals, the best results for me. Saturday morning I'll be showing a little movie about a project we did at a place called On Your Knees Cave, which was an excavation of a 10,000-year-old site that had human skeletal remains in it. And with the discovery of that, we consulted with the tribes on Prince of Wales Island and Cake as well, and eventually with Sea Alaska Heritage and Sea Alaska Corporation. And it brought some really good results. We ended up with a very open process where each season we had Native student interns with the project, initially funded through the National Science Foundation and then through Sea Alaska through their internship program with the site every year. Those students, of course, took the information from their experiences back to the community, to their families, and disseminated that information out into the community, so that there wasn't the paranoia that surrounds a lot of archaeological projects. People knew what was going on and what was happening and what people were saying up at the site and those kinds of things. We also did presentations in the community and to the tribal councils at the end of each season to let people know what was going on. Before it hit newspapers or before it was out in professional reports, the people knew locally what was happening. And we've just continued, and now we're at the point where we have those human remains still. There's a claim in right now from Klawock and Craig for custody of the human remains, and we're about to go forward with the process of transferring custody. It isn't done yet, and I won't say that there might not be problems with it, but the intent is to go forward with that, processing that claim and returning those remains back to the people whose land they're from. So that's that's the kind of process that I think that we need to go for. I think we've been doing that pretty well on the Southern Tongass. I know that for the majority of history we haven't done things that way, but we're doing them that way now, and I think we're going to do it more that way. So and I'd like to talk to you at the end of the meeting if you don't mind. So thank you.
Guna shish ach edis achak yaigi tlach tech tu dachwe in qaqatan guna shish. I'm really concerned because about a year ago I was invited down to Skagway to the tribal council down there. They were going to have the Forest Service there and talking about sacred sites in Skagway. I really was quite touched when they asked me to come down there, because we have aunties and uncles that were in a spirit house in those trunks. Grandma used to call them gold trunks. They're little trunks that they got from the Russians like that. They were in red paper or paint or whatever, and they had gold tacks around it to make it really fancy. Grandma's babies, during the first contact with the white people, they got diseases down there, and she lost her first family. There was 4 little ones that died down there, and her auntie has had a couple of babies, little ones, buried there too. Not buried, but in those trunks. A long time ago, they used to cremate them. Well, in about, my mom wanted to see that grave site. So I took her down there. I was taking care of my mom at that time. And we couldn't find the spirit house that they were in. But there was quite a few in that spirit house. My mom's 4 brothers and sisters, and her auntie's 2 babies, and I think there was 2 or 3 others in those trunks. And when I got up to speak at that conference, somebody came up to me and told me that they thought they knew where those trunks went to, because the Dyea River changed courses, and it started to wash away the banks where those spirit houses were. And there was only one spirit house there in Dyea. they had what they called the slide cemetery. The white people were buried somewhere else. They weren't in the Indian cemetery. Most of the Indian people that was there have been washed away. There's a few still left there yet, but a lot of them were washed away. My mom was really concerned when we went there to visit because we found a whole bunch of lumber piled up under a big tree. And we found another place that was, I'd say about 10 by 15 or something like that, with the chain around this big piece of cement platform close to the river. And I thought probably that's where that house was. But then when we were walking away from there, we found under a tree close to the creek a big pile of lumber there. We thought that those trunks were swept out into the river. So my mom was really quite concerned, so she went and talked to Austin Hammond, who is related to her. And Austin told her that it would be all right for her to have a potlatch and put the names on a stone and set it up there in Dyea somewhere. She said, I don't want my brothers and sisters to just fade away without not having anything around, she said. So we had a big potlatch in Skagway, and she put up that little stone there with all those names on that, because it was the Deshiton people that were in that little house. And I've been really worrying about it since that lady told me that she thought she knew where those trunks went to. And since then I was talking to a really good friend of mine, a young girl. She took her young family up there to Dyea, and she said they camped in the berry picking time. They camped there in a campground, and she said when they went to bed at night, she said she could hear kids playing on the beach. She said lots of kids, she said, all playing, laughing and talking. She said she could hardly sleep. They were making so much noise. She thought a whole bunch of people came in during the night. Morning time when she got up, there was not a soul around there. No cars, nothing, she said. She figured it was the spirits of those kids that were all there in that gravesite. And I've been really concerned since she told me that, because I know that there must be wandering around still down there. And I really would like to have Bob's help to see if he could find what happened to those trunks. And this my cousin Doris, those are her people too, because we're cousins. So if anything she could add to that, it would be really good. But I really thank you guys for listening to me, and I hope you could help us to find where my aunties and uncles went to. How good doors.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Doris McLean. I'm from Whitehorse, Yukon, and I belong to the Duckleweedy clan. I came to this meeting specifically because I know our sacred places are not being acknowledged by non-native people. It's simple as that. There is no respect because they have to have, in our country, Canada, they have to create a law, and that's the human rights law, because they don't know how to show respect. I know that once we start putting our people in places to govern ourselves and to work for us, things like this would not happen anymore. One of the things that I have a real concern about is that graveyard in Dyea, they're having meetings. They want to divert the river, and they want to cover up that grave site. And it's a real concern for myself as a family member who have, our grave sites there. To us, those are very, very sacred. Anytime we lose and we bury people, it's sacred. And I don't think we should allow this to happen. We all have to be united to make sure that this does not happen, that our grave sites would not be considered, because they are in the next world, and these worlds mingle together. As Aboriginal people, we know that. There's nobody on this earth that can tell us that this world and in this level and the other levels is not the same. Because when the missionaries came, they said what we know and what we were taught for centuries was not good enough. I think we all have to be united. We all have to stand up and say, you're not going to touch our sacred places. That's it. And you apply for those jobs. Then they won't have to consult with us. You'll be there to tell them which way to do things properly. Thank you.
It's very interesting about what's going on with the IE. We were called also to go up to Skagway. There is an individual buried there that comes from Sitka. His name is Sitka Jack. And I won't get into that too deeply because it's very sensitive to the people of Sitka on what happens to Sitka Jack up there at Dai. But the clan leader who went with me, we made peace with the spirits there. Because when you talk about these kinds of places, it's very important to make peace with the spirits. So we had the elder talk to the spirits of the place, and we thanked them for and there is something going on there with that river. It's eroding the whole side of the river, so many of the bodies are beginning to become exposed, and it's a very complex situation what's going on there in Dai, and I wonder sometimes if we can stop nature. I wonder about that, because that's a pretty big river, and I wonder, if we have it within our power to stop that kind of erosion. So it's a very complex situation that has no easy answers, and I hope that the families that have people buried there can come to terms with what's going to happen and come up with some sort of plan. Because there's a lot of families that this is going to affect, and I hope that we can work out something. Is there any other questions? We have 15 minutes left. They need to use this room at 5:30. Fred, did you want to say something?
Why there's certain places there's only 2 or 3 people buried. Now, I don't know if it applies to other towns, but in Sitka, we all used to live in the village, and there was 2 different religions came into town, and what happened was some of the people would choose one religion and they would be buried in their lot. Others would choose another religion and they would be buried there. But there was a lot of families that didn't choose either one. They didn't want either one. And in the house I grew up in, there was graveyards on both sides. Both properties had graves there. And I asked why that is. And that's what they told me. They said They didn't want to go to the cemetery, so they just buried them right in the corner of their own property. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that this session was helpful to you. I'd like to thank the Forest Service for their expertise and help on the sacred sites policy, and the elders who came forward and with their concerns. It accomplished what I had hoped that this session would accomplish. It'd start a dialogue. And Irene, it's because of you that I didn't ask any of the ladies to get up and leave. It's because of the dignified way that you approach your job and your work. And it has allowed me, this is a touchy issue for me, and very touchy for me to express. It has allowed me to open up my heart and not be so narrow-minded about how deeply I feel about gender. So I want to thank you for coming into this room and sharing what you have done with your job, and it's allowed me to be more open. And I hope and pray that people aren't offended, and that people don't get hurt by what we do, and that anything that we do is done in a good way. And I'd like to close this session. I'd like to ask one of our elders to come forward and maybe close it with prayer, because for me, it's just the way I was raised, because it's such a sensitive issue. And so if there's an elder, Adelaide, I would be honored if you could close this session with prayer. I'm doing this because it is sensitive, and that I deeply respect the prayers of my elders and their wisdom, and so that we could leave this room in a good way.
Thank you. This has been a good session. Before I pray, I'd like to mention our former son-in-law years back saw how we cared for our cemetery and for our family. And he was just amazed. He says, when I leave this world, he says, this is where I want to be. And that's pretty good. Anyway, let's all, those of you that can, let's stand. Dear Lord, we thank you once again that we could gather like this and express our feelings, share our stories, see where we've been, where we're coming from, where we're going. Just guide us and give us wisdom in all that we say and do. Be with us, with those that travel, those that are coming, those going. And guide each of us, Lord, we pray, and that we might grow through this, find strength and comfort and guidance. We thank you once again in your name. We all say, amen. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.